Good morning. I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel. And I want to really thank you for the people who have subscribed and also making comments. I endeavor to answer all of them when I get an email saying that there's been a comment made. I just really feel honored when that happens. So just keep on with your likes and subscribing to the channel and all that. Now, in the last few weeks, I've been talking about the philosophy that the tarot has given me over the years. The wands, the cups, the swords, and the pentacles, and primarily the higher arcana. I want to sort of tie that up today with some of the patterns that they said. Now, in 1987, I published my second tarot book called Exploring the Patterns of the Tarot. And a lot of what I've talked about is in that book. I also republished it in, I think it's 1998. And in it, I talk about how it shows how we have different patterns. Now, the first one I want to address is what I call defensiveness. And as you follow the symbology, what you begin to realize, it all starts because we feel insecure. It all begins when the insecurity happens, and then we go to defense. We go to be more, you might say, no matter what, like this is the way it is. We refuse to look at our feelings. We refuse to hear maybe even anybody else, and we do get into conflict because of that. It also moves into our attitudes then of life, reacting, again, overreacting, keeping things at bay, pretending we're open when we're not really, being stubborn and set. These patterns show up a lot in people's readings because whenever we have an insecurity base, then it bleeds through into a lot of other elements. There's also other symbols that come up that take on a defensive pattern if there's quite a few defensive symbols already. I know I spent a lot of time and many, many years, believe me, working on when I was feeling insecure and therefore reacting. And slowly and surely through the inner work that I've done, I began not to be so insecure. One say at times I'm not, what would you call it, a little fearful or a bit concerned, but not really when someone says something to me, I don't have that knee-jerk reaction to defend my position or my sense of self. So that has been a really big bonus and sort of in the last quite a few years, but still compared to where I was in the beginning, I was probably one of the most defensive persons because I felt so vulnerable in my internal being, because I wasn't whole. And I had lots of issues, which actually is what got me into self-growth and self-belief in a way, and finding answers and looking for things that worked for me. And so that defensive pattern over the years has become less and less and less. And if I find myself reacting in any kind of defensive mode, I really do check myself. Like, what is going on? Where are you feeling insecure? What is it touching? Where do you feel vulnerable? It's when we feel vulnerable and we are not sure, we're going to put up those defenses, and we all have different tactics about that. We all have different ways of working with that. Now, the next pattern I want to talk about is the imagination pattern. As far as I'm concerned, there's only 4 symbols that relate really strongly to that pattern, and it's fast and it's deadly. Now, we all dream, and it's important to dream. We will need to set up a dream before we begin to recognize what we are wanting to create into a goal and where we want to go. But if your dreaming is not based in some form of reality, what can happen is we get so caught up in our own mental mind of thought of how it may be and what it may be, that actually becomes an attitude that we're not really listening or looking at what is actually in or what it is and how it works, and everything begins to get a little bit scrambled. And this is where the deadliness happens, because we are not being honest with ourselves, and we begin to delude ourselves that what we believe, what we think, what we're doing is absolutely right. And that leads to where we're totally locked in to our own emotions, just locked into our emotions totally. One of the things I've learned over the years is that the need of having a balance between the mental and the emotional parts of us. And when we get locked into the emotion, because the imagination, it has to come into an emotional way. It actually comes from where the emotions get out of control. And we begin to believe, we begin to think that we're right no matter what. And we're tied up. And so until we begin to untangle that and see things in a different perspective, that imagination is going to keep playing a really strong part. I often find that many people have the beginning of it, or even the attitude of it. Like I will just stay in my own bubble and think what I think, and that's it. But when it begins to move into self-deceit, when it moves into a place of we're not believing, or we're not listening, or we're not seeing or hearing, but it's like, what do they used to say? We believe in our own press release. When we believe in our own press release, when we think that's it, that's the end of that, it can lead to us really being restricted within our lives. So I really watched for when that imagination pattern begins to arise or begins to come forward, because I know the quickness of it, how fast we can move in it. And as I say, I think it's quite deadly. It's because we end up absolutely caught up in all of our emotional, and we're stuck. We actually get stuck because now we got to be, probably the defensive mechanism comes in. We have got to defend our position. And our position is not a real position. It's an imagined position, because that's where it starts. So there's lots of the self-growth element of where we are and what we're doing and how it's looking and all those kind of things. Perhaps the biggest pattern throughout the tarot is the absorption. When we get absorbed, when we get caught up, when we get, there's loads of symbols that talk about absorption. And usually it shows where we are looking at one thing within the whole symbol, whether it could be a wand or a cup, or we get tied up. The swords tie us up more, like we get locked in our own misery and our own sadness and our own pain. That we have a few symbols that talk about constructive absorption. Like when we do a job, it's like when I'm speaking to you here, my mind needs to be here, not on something I'm going to do in another hour. It's that kind of absorption is really very important for success and awareness. But often it is not very, very helpful, because we're locked into our emotions of loss, emotions of not knowing what to do, and kind of get stuck in a way. Or we can get obsessed. Yes, we can. That is also another part of absorption. We can get obsessed over money in particular, or how we want things to be. We can have, as I pointed out in the cup symbology, when everything is going really, really well, we don't want to disturb that, especially in our relationships. And what do we find is that we kind of lock on and we start ignoring things. And the next thing, of course, that gets lost. And then, of course, we get absorbed in the loss. Excuse me a sec here. I've just got a little tickle in my throat this morning. The weather is really hot here, really heated up in the last few days here. And I've just got back from driving over 3,000 Ks. So there's a little bit of after the travel element. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the absorption that comes through in the higher arcana. We've got the strength, temperance, and the star. Each one of those has a sense of absorption. Maybe temperance is not as much, but definitely the strength and the star. All of the patterns that I talk about have a symbol, if not many, of the court cards, which are the attitudes, and then they always end up into the higher arcana, which is what I call the laws and the lessons of life. Now, the one thing I love about the strength symbol, it's tackling the issue, whatever that issue is. It doesn't matter what it is. It's looking at it, it's working with it, it's dealing with it. The same thing with the star. And the star I'm going to talk about again in a moment or two in another pattern, because not always just one pattern, there's sometimes several patterns. What I love about the temperance is the balance element of it. And as the star, both temperance and the star deal with balancing, keeping things in an even keel, keeping things in a way that works in an effective way. And communication also. There's a number of symbols that talk about communication. How does communication work? How do we talk? Are we like the Five of Wands, where we are, what do we say, fighting? Whether it's an internal idea fighting, or whether we're fighting, which is more like the Five of Swords. Notice both of those are number fives, where we're mentally fighting ourselves. So what's our communication? All scrambled internally. Or are we fighting somebody else because this is part of a defensive symbol, of course, but it's still communicating, not communicating well. That's what that says. And yet the Two of Cups is balanced and communicating excellently. There's all ways we can communicate: internally, externally, and mostly is the listening to the communication of a teacher. And that's what we want to, I'm going to talk about in the sense of learning. Being open to learn. For me, there's 3 higher arcana symbols that relate to this that are really, really important. The Hierophant represents the teacher. Excuse me, that's what I've done a lot in my life, taught all sorts of different elements of meditation, psychic development, personal growth, past life regression in particular, too, as well. And you might say the responsibility of students is to listen and learn and incorporate what you hear into your lives to make it work in an effective way. So the outward visible teacher is an important point. I found a lot of people were looking at, what would you say, at books and tapes. And even though I'm an author and written a number of books, I find the personal touch, and even though we do that a lot today through, excuse me, through Zoom and through Skype, and other ways of communicating face to face, there's nothing like being in front of a person and feeling the energy. Unfortunately, right now with the lockdown that we have happening, here I go again, little throat thing here. What happens there is that we don't get a lot of the actual energetic. In a way, we're in our own little bubbles, rather than learning the input of what we're wanting to learn in an energetic way. It's surprising what I can pick up as a teacher when someone's in front of me, how their body reacts to something. A little bit I can do for sure on through something like what we're doing here, getting it up, and when a person is in front of me. But basically, that individual touch for eons of time. This is how we learned. We went and studied with a person, with a group or something, and we took that and we worked with it. Now, the next stage of that is that you learn to trust. First of all, you trust the teacher. First of all, if the teacher makes sense to you, you trust the teacher, and the teacher gives you, you might say, keys to work with. Then comes the ability to go inside and listen to your own guidance. We must know and look and listen to our own guidance. We must learn to trust ourselves in circumstances. And then what begins to happen is that you have a balance with that understanding and learning, and you're able to just move it out. Actually, I'll tell you the 3 symbols. There's the Hierophant, the Hermit, and the Star. The Star is a person who still learns for themselves, still carries on with what they have to do, but they disseminate. I often think that the Star becomes the Hierophant. She becomes the teacher, becomes that part, but at the same time still continues on their journey. For it's always there to grow just that little bit more, that little piece that still needs maybe a bit of refinement, a bit of understanding. And what that does is keep you humble and keep you aware. But the learning element in life is really, really important. And I find that to a large degree, that has kind of moved away from the younger generation. In the spiritual sense. So often they come in for a reading and I talk about philosophy and I talk about some things, and it's like, if I used to talk about the spiritual journey, which for myself was always very important, and they look at me blankly. And so I had to change my wording. I had to say, I talk about philosophy. What's your philosophy? How are you perceiving the world? Because so much of the younger generation, and that can be 30 younger, maybe even going some of them into 40s now, they don't seem to have a grasp of what I would call spiritual understanding, how the path works, how the soul come into connection to that. They don't understand. And there are times I have felt a little frustrated, not quite knowing what to do here. All I can do is use the word philosophy and talk my philosophy so that they have a chance of understanding and deciding for themselves that, oh, maybe there's something in that. And very often they'll come back again for readings, where I prefer to move them into clearing work, where they can get to the inside of the programming that they've got stuck inside, we'll say. But it's almost like it's too much of an effort. I don't know. It's one of the things that I ponder and hear about. How do we get people to be aware, like those of us, there used to be many of us go to places to learn, to understand and figure out our spiritual journey. And I think that's really, really important. Now, one of the elements my teacher used to drum into us when I was learning tarot was, he had 3 words: balance, control, and reason. And balance shows up a lot in the tarot too. It's in all the way through. And again, as I said, the temperance is part of that balance, and so is the star, and in particular the world, the number 21 of the higher arcana, before you come to the 0 of the Fool, which binds everything together. Balance. We can't just be all inside. We must communicate and be part of the group, which is outside the door. We need to create a balance between internal and external. Right now in our world, it's not happening that way. We have a little group we may have involved with, but so many people are running in fear. I find when I go somewhere, is that they kind of, oh, don't get too close or whatever. So there's a lot going on around some of what is natural for us as human beings, not being able to live in exactly the way we want to. But I want to talk about what the journey is, because I need to tie up this whole journey of the tarot in the last several weeks that I've been discussing. And that is the understanding of the law of love. Love is everywhere. It is an energy. Now, this is my belief, so please bear with me on this one. To me, it is an energy that is in everything, that it is everywhere, and that all we need to do is really become aware of it and incorporate it internally so that we can access it at any time. It is interesting that in the tarot that the 3rd symbol, the Empress, represents the law of love. Because when we become aware that there is an energy in this universe that is there for us, we become aware of the loving force. Some of us have phenomenal experiences, and it stays with us forever. Others are a little bit like me, who creeps into a pool on the low side and bit by bit, never jumping in the deep end. There's a story about that, which I won't bore you with, why I don't do that. But it's like we feel it, we know it, we pull away, we feel it again, and each time we get stronger and stronger and stronger. But I will say that when I first contacted the law of love in its absolute form, I knew without an inkling anywhere that I had to get it inside. because mostly we reach out, and people will tell you, reach up and out. It's not where it needs to be. It needs to be in. So the three symbols that depict this law of love being applied that I have in this book is the Empress, the law of love, the strength, the applying of this energy into your life, and the star, where you embody it, that it is part of you, and that you are with it, and that you know that all is well. It took me a long time to learn how to connect with love. It took me a long time to understand that in every cell, no matter whether it's the table that everything is sitting on here, the lamp that is beside me, the chair that I sit in to watch my television, all has love within it. And what is love? It is the absolute acceptance of who you are. It has no judgment. It just loves you. We can use other words, but basically it's the word love that is there, all encompassing, all accepting, and all awareness. Now, over these last several weeks, quite a few actually, this will hopefully wrap it in a nice little package as to why we use the tarot, why I still use the symbolism that was created at the end of the 1800s. Why, for me, when I'm reading for people, it is just tells me what I need to know for them. It shows the way. It always has shown the way. I didn't always listen to it, you know. I used to not always listen because I was stubborn. And I thought I knew better often. But I learned over the years that if I just listened and took in and worked with it, my life was better and clearer. And I came to understand more and more, not only of myself, but of humanity, and discovered words like humility, what they really meant. Discovered that no matter whatever happens in life, everything adds. You just need to let go, accept, and go on, rebuild how you want to the next time. It's a journey. And eventually we come to the end of the journey, no matter early or middle-aged or late, we come to that end. But more about that in weeks to come. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for being here. And remember, you can always subscribe, or you can check out my website, www.normacowie.com. And until next week, Norma Talks, Women at Norma Talks will be back. Remember, on Sunday, I do have a little live stream called A Sunday Thought. Blessings to you all.
Well done.
Okay, here we go. One more time. Oh, yeah, the timing was good too. I was hoping it wasn't going on too long. I don't like watching too long. Oops, I'm still recording. I didn't.